Well, welcome to the presentation entitled Improving Soil. This is part 2 of the Soil Where to Begin presentation. My name is Becky Hoganson. I'm with the Grayson County Master Gardener program. We're located in North Texas. There are parts of this presentation that come from the NCTC Horticulture Director Ashley Hartman's lectures on the living soil and on composting. In part 1 of this presentation, we looked at different types of soil: clay, sand, loam, sandy loam, silt. Now let's take a look at how to find out what kind of soil that you have on your property. There's this amazing tool that is free for everyone to use. It's called the Websoil Survey. It's provided by the National Resources Conservation Service, part of the USDA. The Websoil Survey provides soil data and information. It is operated by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service and provides access to the largest natural resource information system in the world. NRCS has soil maps and data available online for more than 95% of the nation's counties and anticipates having 100% in the near future. The site is updated and maintained online as a single authoritative source of soil survey information. A soil survey is a detailed report on the soils of an area. The soil survey has maps with soil boundaries and photos, descriptions, and tables of soil properties and features. Soil surveys are used by farmers, real estate agents, land use planners, engineers, and others who desire information about the soil resource. This is a very easy to use resource. All you have to do is go to this website and type it in. It will take you right to the source. Fairly easy to use. You can click on the button, Start Websoil Survey. You select the area of interest. There's a tab you click on it for address, and you can put in the address that you're seeking the soil web survey for. Click and draw a box around the property. There's a little tool called AOI. So click on that and draw a box around your property. Then select Soil Map tab. You'll find a lot of information on this website. Just kind of play around with it and see what you can find. If you need help with any of this, contact your local agricultural agent, and I'm sure they will be glad to help you. Another source that you can use for learning about the soil on your property is by taking a soil sample. You can obtain a sample bag and a sample information form from your local extension office, or you can also print out the form online from the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension website. By getting this soil sample, you'll get a report when they analyze your soil to let you know what nutrients are missing in your soil, and it'll also let you know the pH level of your soil. Now, to get a sample, what you need to do is to go to the area that you're wanting to sample, like in your backyard, and you take a small spade, a small shovel, and dig down below the O horizon. You want to get down into that topsoil and take you a sliver of soil, put that into a bucket, go to another part of the yard and get a selection from there, and then a different part of the yard. You want to get from maybe 10 different areas of your yard, or if you're using raised beds, from different raised beds. Now, take that soil, put it into the bucket, shake it around, get all the limbs and leaves and twigs and sticks out of there. You do need to make sure that it's dry. You don't want to send them wet soil. They can't test it on that, but make sure that it's dry, uncontaminated. You also don't want to dig soil from anywhere where animals may be using the restroom, dogs, cats. Okay. Remove all the debris. Now, put it into the bag. If you don't have the sample bag, any kind of bag will do. Get it in an envelope and then mail it off with your form. Now, the forms they do have, the Texas A&M AgriLife has two separate forms. There's a soil sample for larger areas like ranches, big farms. There is an urban form for the casual homeowner with a small property. Routine analysis sample will give you basically what you need, but you can also pay additional fee to get learn about micronutrients and boron, organic material, texture analysis. There's a lot of different analysis they can do for you. Now you'll mail off the form, the sample, and a check to the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and the address is on the bag and on the form. They will respond back to you in a few weeks and give you by email and give you your soil report. If you have a large area you're wanting to do, say you have a ranch or a farm, you may want to do multiple soil samples, like an area that's down by the creek or an area that's up on a hill or something that's out in a big field or a wooded area, because that may differ in different parts and you want to know what those are. It is recommended to redo a soil sample every few years, especially as you're amending your soil, so you're aware of what nutrients are in your soil and what you might be missing, or what this helps with your amending, so you'll know what you'll need to add. There are different nutrients that plants require for life. Some of those nutrients come directly from air and water: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. There are also macronutrients and micronutrients that they obtain from the soil. The ones they need the largest amounts of are the macronutrients, and this includes nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. When you get your soil report back from your soil survey, this will let you know what you may be missing in your soil or what you have plenty of. Now, what is the purpose of all these? Well, nitrogen, and it has the symbol for N, is required at the highest levels. This provides the green vegetative structure. Phosphorus, with a P, is for flower and fruit formation, also for chlorophyll. Potassium, or potash, with a K, root development, regulation of guard cells, pest, disease, drought, and cold tolerance, and cellular strength. Calcium, these three, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, are the ones that we see the most, and we'll be talking about that when you find that on fertilizer bags. Calcium is needed for cell walls, rigidity, magnesium, chlorophyll, and sulfur for nodule formation in legumes and also for chlorophyll. Now, all of these do have multiple purposes, and they interact with each other. Some of these nutrients are mobile. They can move around in the plant, and some are immobile. There are also micronutrients. The plants need these also, just in smaller amounts. You will find these listed on fertilizer bags, and that's not a number that we look at as much as this one, but it is still important, and your soil report will list these on there too. Now, back to the mobile nutrients. When a plant experiences a deficiency from its growing medium, these nutrients are harvested from the older leaves and transported to where they need it. The symptoms will show on the older leaves. They'll start looking yellow, and you can tell that they're dying. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and sulfur are ones that are mobile. The immobile nutrients, these are the ones that cannot move around in a plant, and the deficiency symptoms appear on new growth. You'll see new leaves that are showing signs of struggling. These would be the micronutrients and also calcium too. There are plant charts that you can look at to help you kind of diagnose what might be missing in a plant. I'll post a few links for those in the comments section. Then it helps to kind of try to figure out what's going on with your plants, to help you kind of figure out what you might need to add. Now let's get further into the NPK that you'll find on fertilizer bags on reading the bag. The N stands for the nitrogen, and we typically think that as overall green, part of the plant proteins. This is very vital to the plant's health, the overall greening of the plant. Sources from this come from organic matter, microbial activity, legumes, and also from rain. The phosphorus, designated with the P, helps with the transport of energy to the plant. Plant bloom, color, vitality, root development. Sources for this are rock phosphate, compost, and phosphoric acid. Potassium, potash, that's the K. This is a metabolic regulator of the plant and root growth for winter hardiness and summer hardiness of the plant, cellular walls, and sugar transport. A lot of sources for this include granite dust, green sand, potassium sulfate, molasses, and compost. Now these three numbers you'll find listed on fertilizer bags. The first number is going to be the N, the second number P, and the third number K. And just think of it basically, even though they interact in many different ways, but we typically think of it as nitrogen, overall greening, potassium, phosphorus, root development and blooms, tops and bottoms, and potassium for the cellular strength to maintain through a hard winter and to handle summer heat. Fertilizer contains two types of ingredients. There's active and inactive. The active ingredients may be nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, boron, calcium, and magnesium. Many bags are filled with filler for the rest of the bag. The inactive ingredients are the fillers, and they include sand, granular limestone, sawdust. Fillers are used to dilute or reduce the concentration of fertilizer's active ingredients. If it was just all straight fertilizer, that would burn the delicate roots and the stems. There are fertilizers that can be water soluble and coated with a coating for a time release. In some areas, you'll find that phosphorus is restricted due to runoff causing algae bloom. We had a problem here at Lake Texoma in North Texas a few years ago where we were getting a horrible algae bloom on our lake, and they had to close the lake, no swimming, fishing, and that was a big deal to close a major lake for an entire summertime, but it was due to this algae bloom. A lot of people don't realize the damage we do to our environment from backyard gardening, applying too much fertilizer and pesticide and herbicides to our land, especially to lawns, not applying it properly, applying too much, and applying it before a rain, because a rain can come and wash that right down into the sewer system, which goes into the streams and creeks, into lakes, and there we go with a big issue. So that you will find some areas that restrict that middle number, that phosphorus number. Now, interestingly, the NPK is kind of an international numbers that you will find. A few years ago, I was in Guatemala, and we were just hanging around in a town, and I happened to be leaning on a doorway leading to a little small store, and I looked over and I saw all these bags stacked up. Well, I don't read Spanish, but I could tell by looking at the bags, I saw their NPK, and it gave the percentage of what they needed for their soil there. Nitrogen was 20%. They didn't have the phosphorus, didn't need that. They had the potassium, had a number for that, and apparently they were needing some sulfur in their soil there. So it was kind of interesting to find in a different country also using the NPK numbers too. Let's take a look at synthetic or chemical fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers are man-made chemicals and inorganic substances. They typically can combine nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and other elements in different ratios. Synthetic fertilizers, unlike organic, supply immediate essential nutrients to the soil, often called inorganic, artificial, or manufactured. Now, what is the benefit of a synthetic fertilizer? Well, synthetic fertilizers are faster acting, especially when plants are in distress. If a farmer has a field that's struggling and they need that crop to succeed because that's what their livelihood is dependent on, they can use the synthetic fertilizers to get what they need to those plants. It provides even, consistent feeding. It's easily controlled, highly analyzed to produce the exact ratio of nutrients desired. They can apply what that plant needs specifically for that type of plant. It is more inexpensive than the organic. However, there's still cost involved, and it's readily available. Now, something that you need to keep in mind, and this is very important, that using any pesticides, herbicides, or fungicides, that the label is the law. When you purchase that bag and you open that bag, you're agreeing to what is stated on the bag and that you're going to be applying that to what it has listed on the bag. A lot of people don't realize that when they apply something to their soil, even just in a small backyard, that they can affect their neighbors. This has happened in grape orchards. Somebody will spray something on a plant, it drifts over to the grapes, it can damage or kill the grapevines, and then who's responsible for replacing those grapevines and paying for the damage? The person who sprayed the chemicals. So pay attention to the label, read the label, know what it's for, and how you can apply it. How can you apply fertilizer? Well, there are different ways to apply it. It can be applied pre-planting, putting it into the soil as you're preparing the soil for planting, or post-planting it. And in post-planting, it can be put side dressing about 3 inches away from the seeds or seedlings in a row, so the plant roots will grow to that. Broadcasting over entire area, and again, read the label so you'll know the rate to broadcast and how to work it in. And they have equipment that you can use to do that. Controlled release can be applied to individual plants in containers, indoors, outdoors. It's designed to dissolve with room temperature and also by moisture too, so it's a controlled release of those nutrients. A foliar application is when the fertilizer is added to a water and then dissolved and sprayed directly onto the leaves. It provides a faster absorption of the nutrients into the plant. Liquid and water-soluble fertilizers can be applied to the root zone, or foliar sprayed. This is a faster absorption. There's constant feeding or fertigation, and if this, you think of greenhouses where they have the chemicals that are applied to the water, and that water is used to water the plants. Hydroponics often uses this. Needle feeding, a liquid injection to get fertilizer to the tree roots. Synthetic and chemical fertilizers contain high levels of salt. Now, this is an important fact to know if you're wanting to garden in an organic method, because the high use of salt will kill off bacteria, fungi, microorganisms, and earthworms. It also will halt sustainability of the soil, and it makes the plants dependent on us to apply nutrients. So keep this in mind if you're wanting to move to organic gardening. Synthetic chemicals will affect your ability to garden organically. This is a good graphic that shows the differences between organic fertilizers and chemical fertilizers. In the organic fertilizer cycle, you feed the soil with organic material. The nutrients go down into the soil, and it'll feed the soil nutrients. It provides nutrients down into the soil to feed the microorganisms, all that bacteria and the wonderful things that we learned about living down in the soil. They in turn provide nutrients for the plant, and the plant will absorb those through the roots. As the plant material dies and you allow it to go back down to the soil, that'll also get nutrients back down into the soil. So this creates a cycle that can continue on. Sustainability. In chemical fertilizers, you're providing nutrients to the plant that you can tightly control. The nutrients go down into the soil, down through the roots, and feed the plant. This cycle does not continue. It is dependent on us to provide the fertilizer back down into the soil for the plants. It's not actively being recreated and continuing through the microorganisms living down in the soil and the organic material that feeds them. There are different reasons, different times that both can work. I hate to say one is definitely better than the other. I mean, I like to eat, and many ranchers and farmers have to use the chemical fertilizers to provide mass amounts of food. I would like to change my yard to using more organic fertilizers because I want the healthy living soil. It is strictly a personal decision, whatever you choose to do, because remember, you do you for your garden. I did read a story of a farmer in Africa. It was a lady who she knew she wanted to do organically. She knew this was something she wanted to do for her soil, but she didn't have the luxury of time. She was dependent on using chemical fertilizers because she said she needed to be able to feed her family and she needed to be able to produce food. If she didn't produce food to feed her family, they would get sick and possibly die. So she didn't have the luxury, the time to improve her soil organically. It strictly is a personal decision, what you want to do, and depending on your resources and what you're able to do. Ah, earthworms. Oh, we just love earthworms. When I'm working in my garden and I'm digging and I find a worm, I say, oh, thank you. I'm so glad you're there doing what you're supposed to do. And I just so heartbroken when I accidentally hit one with a shovel. That makes me so sad. Earthworms create the perfect food for plants. This is a food that will not burn plants. You can't overuse this. They are there for a reason and they're doing their thing. They help to break up hard pans, to loosen compaction. If you have clay soil, worms are your friend. You definitely want them. Balance nutrients in the soil. Now, very interesting, worms shed a mucus off of their skin when they're digging their tunnels. And that mucus lines these tunnels and creates little pathways that water and air can flow through. Those mucus-lined tunnels can last for years, allowing water and air to penetrate. Amazing, amazing. The poo from worms is called castings, and this is amazing good stuff. 5 to 10 times the amount of soluble plant nutrients as soil, won't burn the plants. You can buy worm castings. I have seen it in bags at big department stores. You can look online, find people who sell this. I've seen them at farmers markets too. And you can also do your own, raising your own worms, vermicomposting. That'll be in the section about composting. They are known to eliminate thatch. And so interesting, they mix different soil levels together. When we talked about the different levels, you had the O horizon, the A and B and C. Well, worms are doing their thing. They're bringing those nutrients up from way down close to bedrock. They're bringing it up high and going back down and mixing up our soils. Now, if you're going to do vermicomposting, the type of worms they recommend are the red wiggler worms. I've read that it's not recommended to take worms from one area, say like one state or a different county, and put it in your area, that they need to be native, natural to your area. Little side note, we are having an issue in Grayson County in North Texas. We're seeing flat-headed worms, and those are invasive species, bad worms. We don't want those because they kill our native worms. So if you find a worm, and it very obviously has a flat head like a hammerhead shark, it has a very unique head, you need to dig them up, put them in a bottle with some vinegar, salt. You need to kill them. Don't chop them up because they'll continue to grow. But try to kill them, and it probably wouldn't hurt to let your ag extension agent know where you found those worms. So we don't want the hammerhead worms, but our native earthworms, we definitely do. A common method used to improve soil is by utilizing green manure cover crops. This is something that my grandmother knew. She was born back in the early 1900s and gardened her entire life, but she knew to plant those black-eyed peas in the garden after the summer crops were done. And she would let those grow, mature, till them back into the soil, and she knew that that would help improve her soil, and she was right. She was exactly right. Green manure cover crops will enhance the biological activity of your soil, increase the organic content, especially if you utilize no-till practices or even tilling it down in there. Legumes that live in symbiosis with bacteria. Rotational crops can be used as a ground cover, and examples of that are field peas, field oats, hairy vetch, Austrian winter peas, clover, soybeans, and even, surprisingly, okra. Now, in this picture you'll see over here is hairy vetch, and you'll see that growing springtime, summer, in your gardens, summer, I let it grow in my gardens, in my raised beds. However, I do pull it away if it's real too close to a tomato plant or pepper plant. I don't want it pulling nutrients from there, but I do leave it in there. When I pull it out, a lot of times I will just cut it off, leave the roots down in the soil, so everything that has been attached to those roots can get into symbiosis with the bacteria living down in the soil. We have a rancher in Munster, which is close to Grayson County, that utilizes these practices in their pastures. I'm going to put two copies or for information on two videos that you can get to. One is Building Great Pastures, and they're telling about renewing their pasture, planting hairy vetch. And the other video from the Munster grass-fed is no-till using hairy vetch in a coastal Bermuda grass hay meadow. So I'll put information on those two videos down in the comments for you to watch. People often ask, can I use manure in my garden? And yes, you definitely can. However, there's some things that you need to know about that manure before you apply it into your garden. Different animals, the manure coming from the animals can be either hot or cold. Now, hot means that it will be burning nitrogen very rapidly, and that can affect your plants. It can kill your plants or make them very weak. So to apply directly into a garden, you want to go for manure that is cold. Llama, cow, pig, goat, rabbit. Those are all cold manures that you can apply directly to your garden. The hot ones, chicken, horse, and sheep, those need to be composted down. So in your compost, make a compost pile and get it fully composted down before you apply those to your soil. There are different nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium levels of these. Interesting that way down when we get down to the rabbit, very high nitrogen and phosphorus, and there's potassium there. So if you're needing higher numbers than potassium, you might want to go with goat. But it's good. It's important to know about the hot and cold on the manures and how you need to compost those down. It's also important to know where the manure comes from. I heard about a story of a local farmer in our area that got some manure, some cow manure, from the rancher next to them. They took that manure and composted it down. They spread it out into their garden, but pretty soon their plants all started dying. When they did some research, they found out that the rancher had been spraying a chemical called picloram, it's an herbicide, onto the fields to kill broadleaf weeds. Now, when the cows ate the plants that had this herbicide on it, it passed through them, came out into the manure, stayed the manure, and then when it was applied to a garden, being a broadleaf killer, it killed the plants. So it's important to know where the manure comes from. Ask some questions if someone's giving it to you. If they kind of hesitate, no, if you ask them if they're applying herbicides and they hesitate, that's probably a good answer for you. So think about that and really consider. It might be reason to work through local nurseries for that. Recommendations are to apply manure in the fall for your spring crops, so it has all winter long to kind of work down into the soil, especially if it's not fully composted. If you're wanting to garden with more organic practices, there are different fertilizers and applications that you can use that fall under the organic realm. The purpose of going with organic is creating sustainability. You're feeding the fungi and the bacteria in that soil, which in turn provide the nutrients that you need for the plants. We'll go through each of these and talk about the different ones that you can use. Molasses. Now, we're not talking about the molasses as you pour on your pancakes. This is a horticulture molasses. You can buy it either as liquid form or in powder. It's used to feed the bacteria, provide carbohydrates for the beneficial microorganisms that are living down in the soil. Bone meal and blood meal both come from animals. Bone meal is very high in phosphorus, and it's beneficial for root crops such as onions, carrots, radishes, turnips, and parsnips. Flowers that grow from bulbs daffodils, and tubers and corns also benefit from this application. The phosphorus is present in a form that's easily available for plants to use. It won't burn the plants and takes time to break down. Do be aware, though, that it can attract rodents and other critters. I heard of someone one time, they planted a real large bed in a local arena, had planted lots of pretty flowers, had got worked into the soil, bone meal and blood meal. Well, overnight, raccoons and other critters came in digging in that soil to get to that blood meal and bone meal. So be aware of what you might have in your area. It's created from ground animal bones. Blood meal is high in nitrogen, and you can easily add this to your garden too. You can apply it before you plant or even side dressing after you've planted. Adding blood meal to the garden will raise the level of nitrogen and help the plants to grow more lush and green. It can be a deterrent for some animals, such as moles and squirrels and deer, but be aware that it can bring in other animals too. You can find these two in a combination in the same bag, bone meal and blood meal. Cottonseed meal is a product of the cotton industry. It's a slow-release NPK, somewhat acidic, so it's good for acid-loving plants such as azaleas and blueberries. The cottonseed meal has an NPK ratio of 6:0:4, and due to its nutrients, it plays as a good nitrogen fertilizer. Cottonseed meal can also be used to improve the soil's texture. So if you have clay soil and you need to kind of break it up, this will work well to help you bust up that clay soil. It's created from the cotton industry after oil has been pressed out. Fish emulsion is an organic garden fertilizer made from whole parts of fish or parts of a fish. The NPK for this is 4:1:1. It is often used as a foliar feed for a quick nitrogen boost. I know a lady who uses organic permaculture practices on her little small farm, and she lives close to a lake. They saved parts of fish after going fishing, the skull, the skeleton skin, and she would dig down into her soil, bury that, let it decompose down in the soil, and then plant plants right directly over that. Works great, but do beware if you have cats in your neighborhood, something you might need to think about. Green sand is a rich source of glyconite, which is high in iron, potassium, and magnesium. These are all important for good plant health. It's also used to loosen the soil, to improve soil retention, soften hard water, and increase root growth. This comes from the ocean floor. Most of it is mined in New Jersey. However, there is a natural Texas green sand product that contains about 19% iron and 2% magnesium. Its pH level is 8.3. It can be used to break up clay-based soils and will improve moisture retention in sandy soils. This is a product that's highly recommended by a local well-known gardener. A lot of advice is by Howard Garrett. Bat guano is one of the best of the best of the best. This is a suitable fertilizer for plants and lawns, makes them healthy and green. It can be used as a natural fungicide and controls nematodes in the soil as well. In addition, bat guano makes an acceptable compost activator, helps to speed up the decomposition process. Corn gluten is an amazing product that can be used on your lawn. The NPK ratio of this is 8:0:0. Nitrogen, but not the others. It will help prevent the growth of new weeds. So it acts as a pre-emergent. It prevents seeds from sprouting. Make sure you wait 60 days after applying this to your lawn before you apply grass seed, because it is a pre-emergent. If you apply them at the same time, it will keep that grass from emerging, grass seed from emerging and growing. It can be used to fertilize shrubs and transplants. But just be aware of the pre-emergent aspects of this. We talked some about worms and how worm castings are amazing for your soil. This is one of the best things you can apply. Will not burn your soil. Now, compost tea you can create using all of these different things to make a special tea to apply to your plants. Now, this is not a tea that you're going to want to drink. This is a tea for your plants. There are many different ways to brew the tea. You can create a structure that has an aerator in here and putting compost, fish emulsion, maybe some bat guano worm castings, whatever it is that you're using, into a bag and letting it aerate in that water. It typically has to be used very quickly after brewing, so you have like a 12-hour window or even less to apply this to your plants. There's a lot of information out there on brewing compost teas, so just check out YouTube videos and you can Google to find some things. One plant that I've found that I have growing in my yard is comfrey. That falls in herbal medicines. It's used a lot. It's a real large plant, has a deep tap root, gets really big. It's good for mulching around plants, but you can pick the leaves from comfrey, put it into a barrel with water, preferably rainwater. You don't want the chemicals that come from city water, but rainwater. Let it sit for a couple of weeks. It'll be nasty, stinky, smell horrible, but strain out those leaves, dilute it with rainwater, and then you can apply that as a foliar spray to your plants or water around to them, and it's a very natural, organic way to feed your plants. Now let's talk about organic labels that you'll find on different products. In order to make an organic claim or use the USDA organic seal, the final product must follow strict production, handling, and labeling standards and go through the organic certification process. The standards address a variety of factors such as soil quality, animal raising practices, and pest and weed control. Synthetic fertilizers, sewer sludge, irradiation, and genetic engineering may not be used. Requirements are also in place for feeding, housing, and breeding, detailed production, sales records, strict separation of organic products from non-certified products, and period on-site inspections. So to use the organic label, there is very strict regulations to be able to use that label. I know farmers and people who sell at local farmers markets, they said it's too costly for them to go through this process. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and they just don't have the time or money to be able to get that organic label. But what they will do is tell their customers they utilize organic practices, not by putting that symbol on their product, but just letting their consumers know that they use organic practices. So talk to your local farmers who you buy your produce from, and they can let you know what they're doing if they're using organic methods. Organic is non-GMO because the use of GMOs is prohibited in organic production. For example, organic farmers cannot plant GMO seeds, organic livestock cannot eat GMO feed, and organic food manufacturers cannot use GMO ingredients. There are 4 distinct labeling categories for organic products. There's 100% organic, organic, made with organic ingredients, and specific organic ingredients. Now, the labeling by the USDA, very strict, goes through the certification process and then with the 4 different labels. There is also OMRI, which is the Organic Materials Review Institute. This is a nonprofit organization. It evaluates products to be allowed in production. They list items used in the organic farming. This is considered to be high esteem. So when you see that on a product, that lets you know that it is being reviewed and watched and very certified. One of the highest certifications, and the first that utilized in the United States, is the California Certified Organic Farmers, CCOF, accredited certifying agency through the USDA. It was formed in 1973, and this is the first organic certification in the United States. Very high standards. So if you see that on a product, you know that it is definitely organic. Some tips for amending or working with clay soil. Where I live here in North Texas, I have a lot of clay in my soil, so this is something that I definitely have to work with. You want to avoid working with the soil when it is wet. Clay soil, being those tiny flat particles, are prone to compaction, and they will form even harder. So don't work it when it's wet. Also, don't park equipment, trucks, cars over where you're going to be gardening at, because that'll help compact that soil down even harder. Adding organic material is one of the best things you can do. Compost and other materials that will break down fairly quickly. You can also add gypsum or expanded shell. Now, expanded shell is a long-lasting soil amendment that's made from clay or shale, heated in a rotary kiln until it becomes a light, porous ceramic aggregate. Expanded shell helps improve the soil aeration and drainage, and it remains inert in the soil, creating long-term value. However, it can be rather expensive. The gypsum and expanded shell help to put air pockets into the soil and prevent the clay from clumping, but do be aware that it can be rather pricey. This was recommended pretty highly in our area for a while, but I think the cost has kind of turned people off that, and they'll start going more with the organic material. Now take these amendments and mix them down into the soil 4 to 6 inches. You're going to want to till it down to that soil initially. And then eventually, if you're going to do no-till, you won't be doing any tilling after that. Control watering the first few growing seasons. Clay can act like a bowl and really hold water, and this is important when you're planting trees and shrubs. Do a little research on that and figure out how to dig your holes and what you need to do to the side of the hole. Cover with organic material, because again, that organic material work down into the soil to help break it up. And growing a cover crop. Back to that again, what my grandmother knew about those black-eyed peas. The roots will go down into the soil and add the organic material down in there. Growing a cover crop during the colder seasons, the clover, the hairy vetch, the borage, the peas, that'll help improve that soil. Now, something we mentioned before, and you definitely need to keep in mind, is whatever you do, don't add sand, because sand and clay mixed together are like cement. Thinking about making adobe, and when they make adobe houses, that's what they're doing. That's sand and the clay together. So you don't want to do that. Working with sandy soil has some similarities. Adding the organic material, the rail-rotted manure, finished compost, leaves, grass clippings, but you will need to add organic matter each year. The reason for adding the organic material, remember, sandy soil, the soil particles are large, like marbles in a jar. They don't hold water. They will not hold the moisture, and they also don't hold the nutrients. So by getting organic material down into the sandy soil, that'll help hold moisture for you and help retain nutrients that your plant's going to need. You can also add peat moss or vermiculite. There is minimal nutrients in the vermiculite. Some people are a little concerned about using up our peat moss reserve. So again, this is a decision for you. You do you. Whatever works for you. If you live in an area that's close to seaside, salt levels can be high in your sand. So do be aware of that. That might be something that you need to try to work. If you have raised beds for your gardening and you want to get some good living soil, this is a recipe that I used when I was taking classes at North Central Texas College. We were working in raised beds with wooden sides, and they were about 3 feet by 6 feet in length. These beds are heavily used by students each semester, so a very intensive crop growing in those beds. So we needed to add nutrients to the soil to really replenish nutrients that had been pulled out. This is the different things that we added to our soil. Now, for your own use, read the bag. Remember, labels law, so you'll know how much you need to apply for your area. We used blood meal and bone meal, returning animal remains back to the soil. The dried molasses provided sugar for bacteria. You can also get that in the liquid form too. Compost that was created on site, and the purpose to replicate nature's environment, getting that compost created from plants growing in that area back into the soil of that area. Cottonseed meal to help aerate the soil and get some nutrients back down in there too. Water, and it's best if you can use rainwater to really avoid the harsh chemicals that can be in our city water. My teacher, Ashley, says if you do nothing else, mulch. The best mulches come from local sources, leaves and straw, and you're going to keep that in your O horizon. If tilled in, it will use too much nitrogen when decomposing. Now, benefits of mulch include erosion control. That will help keep your soil from washing away, retaining the moisture, and soil temperature. These are two issues we had in North Texas last summer. We had a horrible hot summer, horrible high temperatures in the hundreds with very little rain. So a heavy layer of mulch helped to hold in moisture, especially as you're watering, and then helped kind of control that soil temperature too. And that can help in cold weather too, to help keep your roots from being too cold. Would work for us down here. And enrich the soil fertility. As the mulch decomposes up on the tops on the O horizon, it will mix down into the A horizon into the topsoil and help increase that fertility of your soil. Aerates the soil naturally by getting organic material down into it. Now, weed control, it definitely helps with weed control. It's so much easier to pull out grass or weeds from mulch, a thick layer of mulch, than it is grass and weeds that are growing directly into the ground. If you have a lot of weeds, use at least 3 inches deep on your mulch. If you're trying to control nutgrass or Johnson grass, first cover that area with thick cardboard, then mulch. And I've used the cardboard and mulch in my backyard to start new beds, to start new garden areas without having to use harsh chemicals to kill that grass out. It works really pretty well. And if the grass does start coming through, I can hoe it out, or I can even apply more cardboard and put more mulch on top of that. You'll see how our yields in your fruit and vegetable production with less fruit rot and cleaner fruit. Helps to reduce maintenance of an area. You don't have to spend near as much time hoeing and pulling weeds in your garden. Will prevent mud from splashing up onto your plants that can affect growth. And it's attractive. A pretty layer of mulch just looks good. Looks really pretty in your garden. Now, there are different kinds of mulches you can use. Inorganic mulches, plastic or rock. The rock mulch looks very attractive. It can be a little harder to control grass and weeds, but it has a very attractive, pretty look to it. Organic methods that you can use: straw, leaves, compost, and sawdust. Now, straw, you need to be aware of where that straw comes from. Just like we were talking earlier about applying to your yard, you need to know what was applied to that straw, if herbicides were put onto it. Jill McSheehy, who does the Beginner Gardeners podcast, talks about this. She had that issue several years ago. She was getting straw from a local farmer, put it around her beds. Plants did great. Next year she used straw from the same source. Plants didn't look as good. Third year, nothing grew. And it turned out that that farmer was applying some herbicides to the plants that was used to make the straw, and then that herbicide went into her soil and made her soil infertile. So be aware of where it comes from. Leaves, a great source is ask your neighbors. When you see them raking up leaves in the fall, say, hey, can I have some bags of your leaves? Because if you can use material that's gathered from your area, trees from your area, that works best in your area. Compost that you're creating on site or compost that you buy, and sawdust too. Now, you do have to be aware of sawdust because when it biodegrades, it uses a lot of nitrogen, and it can pull that nitrogen away from your plants. So don't use a heavy layer, just small amounts, and mix it with some other clippings, grass clippings, or some straw, or even just compost it first before you use that. Best to use your local sources, again, from your neighbors. When you see them raking those leaves, say, hey, let me have that bag of leaves. I'll be glad to take it off, or I'll rake your leaves for you if you'll let me have them. Newly cut trees and shrubs, and when the tree crews are in the area, they're trimming up the power lines, they're looking for free places to offload. They would love to offload that for you. So, hey, let me have it. I'll be glad to take that. Be aware that if it's coming off of green plants, trees that they've just cut down that will produce a lot of heat. So don't put that heavy around your plants. You might want to use it kind of pulled back from your plants. But that's a great free source. Do kind of be aware of poison ivy if there is some poison ivy in there. You don't want to add diseased material to your mulch, so kind of keep that out. And again, just the small amounts of sawdust. What I did in my garden last year, my new bed that has the pool bed, when the tomatoes were done for the season, I left up all of the stems and the dead parts, and then over the winter, about January, I got out there and I just stepped on it and mashed it all down. So I'm using that as a natural mulch, putting the nutrients stored that were in that back to the soil, and it kept me from having to go buy more bags of mulch. Now, how much mulch to apply? A depth of 1 to 2 inches if it's a fine mulch. If it's, you can check at the local nurseries and the big box stores, and you can find mulch real thick, big chunky pieces are fine. And if it's fine, you can get by with 1 or 2 inches. If it's coarser mulch, 3 to 4 inches. A little bit deeper for that. I've had a bed that I've applied mulch for about 3-4 years now, and I noticed a really thick layer of mulch now, so next year I can probably skip not having to apply any mulch into that area around the plants and rose bushes that are in that area there. Now we've reached the end of this part of the soil presentation, improving soil. The next section will be involving organic gardening, specifically looking at famous master naturalists, people from our history who've used some amazing gardening practices and techniques that they were famous for, and giving us ideas of what we can do in our gardens. So watch the comment section for videos that I've mentioned, and also plant deficiency charts. And I will be having the next video ready for you soon. Thank you for listening, and I hope you get